Now to the latest in Israel's war with Hamas. The Israelis said today that they killed two of Hamas's top commanders in recent days as their forces remain locked in fierce battles with Hamas fighters in southern Gaza. Also today, Israel accused Hamas of firing rockets from what it called humanitarian zones in Gaza, where civilians are supposed to be safe. Here's tonight's other news you need to know. The U.S. is sending a $175 million military aid package to Ukraine. It includes guided missiles and anti-armor systems. Congress remains stalled on legislation to provide more aid to Ukraine, along with aid to Israel. The Secretary of State says unless Congress approves more funding, quote, this will be the last of the security packages we can provide, end quote. The University of Pennsylvania has lost a $100 million gift from a wealthy donor due to the Ivy League school's weak response to anti-Semitism on campus in the wake of Hamas's attack on Israel. The last straw for donor Ross Stevens was the disastrous performance of Penn's president Liz McGill at a congressional hearing this week, where she gave vague and legal jargon answers when asked if calls for the genocide of Jews violated Penn's code of conduct. Russia, supported by Saudi Arabia, is calling for all OPEC Plus members to cut oil production again. OPEC Plus produces over 40% of the world's oil supply. The cuts will be just over 2 million barrels a day. Russia's goal is to increase prices and try to minimize the discounts on oil driven by sanctions against them for the war in Ukraine. The White House has put pharmaceutical companies on notice. If the price of certain drugs that were developed with help from research funded by taxpayer money goes too high, the patents will be removed. Rival companies could then make their own and cheaper versions. Former President Donald Trump was in court today for his New York civil fraud case. An accounting expert who appeared for the defense said, quote, there is no evidence whatsoever for any accounting fraud, end quote. The former president is scheduled to testify in the trial a second time on Monday. Representative Jamal Bowman is now the third Democrat in the past year to be censured by the House. Bowman was accused of intentionally pulling a fire alarm while the House was assembling for a vote. He said he pulled the alarm out of confusion, but he was criminally charged and made a plea deal. He stood at the front of the House today while the Speaker read the charges against him in a public rebuke. No other discipline is attached to the censure. And finally, this day in 1941, Pearl Harbor was hit by a surprise attack by the Japanese Navy Air Service. The U.S. was a neutral country at the time, but entered World War II the very next day. More than 2,000 Americans were killed and nearly another 2,000 were injured. President Roosevelt called it, quote, a date which will live in infamy, end quote. Several attack survivors who are still living attended the ceremony at Pearl Harbor. Most of them are over 100 years old. A salute and certainly a prayer for all involved.